Hey Shane, like I told you before, not only do I plan on being picky on articles, that's like third or fourth on the list of the reason I'm doing this. One is I think that all of us can learn from each other. Not only me learning from you how to do audio better, but um, maybe you learning from my mistakes of being a writer because I'm only a couple years ahead of you really on doing this type of thing. I want you to open up the article, and I'm going to just give you a second to do that. Um, and as I said before, I think that I was done a great disservice by not getting feedback from my editor. And I've heard from other websites, like for instance Rotoviz, that Frank Dupont, you might know him as at Fantasy Douche. I've heard he is a very hands-on editor, and that's what I've always wanted to be. And I've told Shane that I want him to be, or I'm sorry, I've told Jake that I want him to be that, and that I would work with him in being that. So I wanted to work with him, work with you for him, in being that. So I want to go through your article piece by piece, and I want you to bring it up so that we could go over each little bit. Because honestly, like I told you, I don't think that it's waste. I don't think I'm wasting my time. If I thought I was wasting my time, I wouldn't do this. First of all, second of all, I think that most of what you have done is great. I think there's just some little parts that need fixed, and I want to bring those to your attention. So I'm just going to read your article out loud, and maybe when I read it out loud, you'll see that some of the parts don't make sense. So remember when we had to wait for our dynasty assets to develop? Not so long ago, we were letting players simmer on our bench for 2, 3, or even 4 years before we were counting on them to as contributors. Some of this is going to be my own fault because I've been drinking. That I will read it wrong, but you'll see when I get to the parts that don't make sense. Or even 4 years before we were counting on them as contributors to our fantasy teams. With the recent success of players like Odell Beckham Jr., Mike Evans, DeAndre Hopkins, and Amari Cooper, all of whom reached the 1,000-yard mark in either their rookie or sophomore seasons, it is no wonder that many want instant production. Who doesn't want to be able to draft a guy and plug them right into their starting lineup? We all can't be so lucky, and in reality, we shouldn't expect it. Perfect first paragraph. No issues with that. For those of us who haven't been able to draft instant starters or seem to lose our patience with the developmental process, I'm going. Oh, okay. So it looks like Jake already fixed this part. Okay, I'm going to keep going because this sentence right here was part of my issue, but it looks like he already fixed that. For those of us that haven't been able to draft instant starters or seem to lose our patience with the development process, I'm going to look at a wide receiver who will be entering his third year in two, in 2017 season. Okay, that should read in the 2017 season. Minor issue. That's something that Jake should have been able to put in himself. The word "the" that's not something you should worry about. Um, Worth acquiring for your team with players like Marquise Lee and Devontae Adams having third-year breakouts in 2016. It shows that there is value to be had from players who don't experience immediate success. This is something to keep in mind when doing off-season shopping. Again, second paragraph, no issues other than the word "the" should have been dropped in. That's not something you should worry about. That's something that the editors should worry about. Jamison Crowder is a player who has already shown some promise in the last 2 years and who could make the jump to the 1,000-yard wide receiver club. He may still be reasonable to acquire, not just based on his average draft position in parentheses ADP, but also there should be a comma there. That's again not your fault. But also based on how the Washington Redskins are being perceived right now due to the dysfunction of the organization. Crowder is heading into a prime situation and has a chance to be a top receiving threat, if not the wide receiver one on his team. At worst, the wide receiver two. Um, So just there, just a suggestion, not even huge deal. Crowder is heading into a prime situation and has a chance to be a top receiving threat. If not the wide receiver one on his team, at worst the wide receiver two. Not incorrect grammar, just not the best. Maybe has a chance to be instead of you're kind of redundant there, to be a top receiving threat, if not the wide receiver one on his team, at worst the wide receiver two. Maybe just instead of being redundant, saying has a chance to be. You could even just do away with a top receiving threat. At a chance to be the top receiving threat on his team, at worst the second top receiving threat on his team. It's just a redundant sentence, but also not a big deal and not even grammatically incorrect. Hopefully I get to where I wanted to really correct you at some point, because all of these are really minor at this point. While there has been some noise about him this offseason, now is the time to buy. Cool. No issue so far. No big issues so far. Crowder will be 24 entering the 2017 season. Below are his stats for the previous two seasons. In 2016, Crowder increased his production across the board despite playing behind DeSean Jackson, Jordan Reed, and Pierre Garcon. Okay. You didn't mention any of those names earlier. I wanted them in bold, but also another thing that you don't technically have to know. So whenever you mention a player for the first time in an article, I just want their name in bold. And then when you mention them for a second time, just use their last name. It looks like you started doing that, or maybe Jake started doing that. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. Again, these are minor issues. There were more major issues I thought I saw, but let me keep going. In 2016, Crowder increased his production across the board despite playing behind DeSean Jackson, Jordan Reed, and Pierre Garcon. I think this sentence is the big problem I had. So this is the beginning of a sentence. At best, the third or fourth option on his team in the passing game, depending on the health of the other players around him. Crowder finished third on the Redskins in total number of combined targets between 2015 and 2016. Maybe not. Okay, let me keep going. Garcon led the receiving corps with 225 targets, with Reed getting 203 targets, Crowder 177, and Jackson thrown to 149 times. In 2016, Crowder finished as the wide receiver 31, already producing as the wide receiver 3, even as part of this crowded group of patch catchers. I'm still not finding what I wanted to correct you on. Let me make sure I keep going. With both Pierre Garcon and DeSean Jackson having signed elsewhere, an increased role of Jamison Crowder can be expected. It is seen how he handles increased coverage by opposing defenses, but everything points to Crowder having much bigger impact in this offense. Oh, okay. So here's one thing, and this may be Jake's fault. I see Doctson and Reed are both in bold. Reed should not be. I think Crowder is being mentioned for the first time. Josh Doctson and Jordan Reed, the players Washington retained while watching Garcon and Jackson walk, each come with red flags. While first-round draft pick Josh Doctson is still potentially a major part in this offense, his Achilles injury seems to be rehabbing at a slow rate. As reported by the Washington Post, not really, and we're going to take it slow with him. Jake, at this point, I'm starting to think that Shane, at this point, I'm starting to think that Jake fixed the minor issues that I was talking about. I'm going to keep reading on my own, but I'm almost at the point that I want to apologize for taking up your time. It looks like at least at this point, um, that the very minor issues that I talked to Jake about were fixed through his editing and hopefully from. So I'm probably just talking to myself right now because I'm probably going to tell you not even to listen to what I have had to say. I had some really real issues with some of what was going on in this article, and from what I've read, they have been completely fixed. So it's probably more of something that I could talk about with them. And again, probably just talking to myself as per usual.